Vaudeville, VDVL, French, vaudeville, is a theatrical genre of variety entertainment. It was especially popular in the United States and Canada from the early 1880s until the early 1930s. A typical vaudeville performance is made up of a series of separate, unrelated acts grouped together on a common bill. Types of acts have included popular and classical musicians, singers, dancers, comedians, trained animals, magicians, strongmen, female and male impersonators, acrobats, illustrated songs, jugglers, one-act plays or scenes from plays, athletes, lecturing celebrities, minstrels, and movies. A vaudeville performer is often referred to as a vaudevillian. Vaudeville developed from many sources, including the concert saloon, minstrelsy, freak shows, dime museums, and literary American burlesque, called the heart of American show business. Vaudeville was one of the most popular types of entertainment in North America for several decades. Etymology. The origin of this term is obscure, but is often explained as being derived from the French expression vaudeville, voice of the city. A second speculation is that it comes from the 15th-century songs on satire by poet Olivier Basselin, ヴɔːdᵊvɪl, in his Connections television series. Science historian James Bark claims that the term is a corruption of the French vaudeville, via river valley. In English, an area known for its bawdy drinking songs and where Basselin lived. Some, however, preferred the earlier term, variety, to what manager Tony Pastor called its sissy and Frenchified successor. Thus, vaudeville was marketed as variety well into the 20th century beginnings, with its first subtle appearances within the early 1860s. Vaudeville was not initially a common form of entertainment. The form gradually evolved from the concert saloon and variety hall into its mature form throughout the 1870s and 1880s. This more gentle form was known as polite vaudeville. In the years before the American Civil War, entertainment existed on a different scale. Certainly, variety theater existed before 1860 in Europe and elsewhere. In the U.S., as early as the first decades of the 19th century, theatergoers could enjoy a performance consisting of Shakespeare plays, acrobatics, singing, dancing, and comedy. As the years progressed, people seeking diversified amusement found an increasing number of ways to be entertained. Vaudeville was characterized by traveling companies touring through cities and towns. A handful of circuses regularly toured the country. Dime museums appealed to the curious. Amusement parks, riverboats, and town halls often featured cleaner presentations of variety entertainment, compared to saloons, music halls, and burlesque houses, which catered to those with a taste for the risque. In the 1840s, the minstrel show, another type of variety performance, and the first emanation of a pervasive and purely American mass culture, grew to enormous popularity and formed what Nick Tosches called the heart of 19th-century show business. A significant influence also came from Dutch minstrels and comedians. Medicine shows traveled the countryside offering programs of comedy, music, jugglers, and other novelties along with displays of tonics, salves, and miracle elixirs, while Wild West shows provided romantic vistas of the disappearing frontier, complete with trick riding, music and drama. Vaudeville incorporated these various itinerant amusements into a stable, institutionalized form centered in America's growing urban hubs. In the early 1880s, impresario Tony Pastor, a circus ringmaster turned theater manager, capitalized on middle-class sensibilities and spending power when he began to feature polite variety programs in several of his New York City theaters. The usual date given for the birth of vaudeville is October 24, 1881 at New York's 14th Street Theater, when Pastor famously staged the first bill of self-proclaimed clean vaudeville in New York City, hoping to draw a potential audience from female and family-based shopping traffic uptown. Pastor barred the sale of liquor in his theaters, eliminated bawdy material from his shows, and offered gifts of coal and hams to attendees. Pastor's experiment proved successful, and other managers soon followed suit. Popularity. B.F. Keith took the next step, starting in Boston, where he built an empire of theaters and brought vaudeville to the US and Canada. Later, E.F. Albee, adoptive grandfather of the Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright Edward Albee, managed the chain to its greatest success. Circuits such as those managed by Keith Albee provided vaudeville's greatest economic innovation, and the principal source of its industrial strength. They enabled a chain of allied vaudeville houses that remedied the chaos of the single theater booking system by contracting acts for regional and national tours. These could easily be lengthened from a few weeks to 2 years. Albee also gave national prominence to vaudeville's trumpeting, polite entertainment, a commitment to entertainment equally inoffensive to men, women and children, acts that violated this ethos, e.g., those that used words such as hell, were admonished and threatened with expulsion from the week's remaining performances or were cancelled altogether. In spite of such threats, performers routinely flouted this censorship, often to the delight of the very audience members whose sensibilities were supposedly endangered. He eventually instituted a set of guidelines to be an audience member at his show, and these were reinforced by the ushers working in the theater. This polite entertainment also extended to Keith's company members. He went to extreme measures to maintain this level of modesty. Keith even went as far as posting warnings backstage such as this: "Don't say slob or son of a gun or holy G on the stage unless you want to be cancelled peremptorily. If you are guilty of uttering anything sacrilegious or even suggestive, you will be immediately closed and will never again be allowed in a theater where Mr. Keith is in authority." Along these same lines of discipline, Keith's theater managers would occasionally send out blue envelopes with orders to omit certain suggestive lines of songs and possible substitutions for those words. If actors chose to ignore these orders or quit, they would get a black mark on their name and would never again be allowed to work on the Keith circuit. Thus, actors learned to follow the instructions given them by B.F. Keith for fear of losing their careers forever. By the late 1890s, vaudeville had large circuits, houses, small and large, in almost every sizable location, standardized booking, broad pools of skilled acts, and a loyal national following. One of the biggest circuits was Martin Beck's Orpheum Circuit. It incorporated in 1919 and brought together 45 vaudeville theaters in 36 cities throughout the U.S. and Canada, and a large interest in 2 vaudeville circuits. Another major circuit was that of Alexander Pantages. In his heyday, Pantages owned more than 30 vaudeville theaters and controlled, through management contracts, perhaps 60 more in both the U.S. and Canada. At its height, vaudeville played across multiple strata of economic class and auditorium size. On the vaudeville circuit, it was said that if an act would succeed in Peoria, Illinois, it would work anywhere. The question, will it play in Peoria, has now become a metaphor for whether something appeals to the American mainstream public. The 3 most common levels were the small-time, lower-paying contracts for more frequent performances in rougher, often converted theaters, the medium-time, moderate wages for 2 performances each day in purpose-built theaters, and the big-time, possible remuneration of several $1,000s per week in large, urban theaters largely patronized by the middle and upper middle classes. As performers rose in renown and established regional and national followings, they worked their way into the less arduous working conditions and better pay of the big time. The capital of the big time was New York City's Palace Theater, or just the Palace, in the slang of vaudevillians. Built by Martin Beck in 1913 and operated by Keith, featuring a bill stocked with inventive novelty acts, national celebrities, and acknowledged masters of vaudeville performance, such as comedian and trick roper Will Rogers. The Palace provided what many vaudevillians considered the apotheosis of remarkable careers. A standard show bill would begin with a sketch, follow with a single, an individual male or female performer. Next would be an alley-oop, an acrobatic act, then another single, followed by yet another sketch such as a blackface comedy. The acts that followed these for the rest of the show would vary from musicals to jugglers to song and dance singles, and end with a final extravaganza, either musical or drama, with the full company. These shows would feature such stars as ragtime and jazz pianist Eubie Blake, the famous and magical Harry Houdini, and child star baby Rosemary, adds Gilbert. In the New York Tribune's article about vaudeville, it is said that at any given time, vaudeville was employing over 12,000 different people throughout its entire industry. Each entertainer would be on the road 42 weeks at a time while working a particular circuit, or an individual theater chain of a major company. While the neighborhood character of vaudeville attendants had always promoted a tendency to tailor fare to specific audiences, mature vaudeville grew to feature houses and circuits specifically aimed at certain demographic groups. Black patrons, often segregated into the rear of the second gallery in white-oriented theaters, had their own smaller circuits, as did speakers of Italian and Yiddish. For a brief discussion of black vaudeville, see Theater Owners Booking Association. This foreign edition combined with comedy produced such acts as minstrel shows of antebellum America and Yiddish theater. PBS adds that many of these ethnic families joined in on this entertainment business, and for them, this traveling lifestyle was simply a continuation of the adventures that brought them to America. Through these acts, they were able to assimilate themselves into their new home while also bringing bits of their own culture into this new world. White-oriented regional circuits, such as New England's Peanut Circuit, also provided essential training grounds for new artists while allowing established acts to experiment within Polish new material. At its height, vaudeville was rivaled only by churches and public schools among the nation's premier public gathering places. Another slightly different aspect of vaudeville was an increasing intrigue with the female figure. The previously mentioned ominous idea of the blue envelopes led to the phrase blue material, which described the provocative subject matter present in many vaudeville acts of the time. Many managers even saw this scandalous material as a marketing strategy to attract many different audiences. As stated in Andrew Erdman's book Blue Vaudeville, the vaudeville stage was even marked with descriptions like a highly sexualized space, where unclad bodies, provocative dances, and singers of blue lyrics all vied for attention. Such performances highlighted and objectified the female body as a sexual delight, a phenomenon that historians believe emerged in the mid-19th century. But more than that, these historians think that vaudeville marked a time in which the female body became its own sexual spectacle, more than it ever had before. This sexual image began sprouting everywhere an American went. The shops, a restaurant, the grocery store, etc. The more this image brought in the highest revenue, the more vaudeville focused on acts involving women. Even acts that were as innocent as a sister act were higher sellers than a good brother act. Consequently, Erdman adds that female vaudeville performers such as Julie Mackey and Gibson's Bathing Girls began to focus less on talent and more on physical appeal through their figure, tight gowns, and other revealing attire. It eventually came as a surprise to audience members when such beautiful women actually possessed talent in addition to their appealing looks. This element of surprise colored much of the reaction to the female entertainment of this time. Selected vaudeville artists. List of vaudeville performers. AK. List of vaudeville performers. LZ. Immigrant America. In addition to vaudeville's prominence as a form of American entertainment, it reflected the newly evolving urban inner-city culture and interaction of its operators and audience. Making up a large portion of immigration to the United States in the mid-19th century, Irish Americans interacted with established Americans, with the Irish becoming subject to discrimination due to their ethnic, physical and cultural characteristics. The ethnic stereotypes of Irish through their greenhorn depiction alluded to their newly arrived status as immigrant Americans, with the stereotype portrayed in avenues of entertainment. Following the Irish immigration wave, several waves followed in which new immigrants from different backgrounds came in contact with the Irish in America's urban centers. Already settled and being native English speakers, Irish Americans took hold of these advantages and began to assert their positions in the immigrant racial hierarchy based on skin tone and assimilation status, cementing job positions that were previously unavailable to them as recently arrived immigrants. As a result, Irish Americans became prominent in vaudeville entertainment as curators and actors, creating a unique ethnic interplay between Irish American use of self-deprecation as humor and their diverse inner-city surroundings. The interactions between newly arrived immigrants and settled immigrants within the backdrop of the unknown American urban landscape allowed vaudeville to be utilized as an avenue for expression and understanding. The often hostile immigrant experience in their new country was now used for comic relief on the vaudeville stage, where stereotypes of different ethnic groups were perpetuated. The crude stereotypes that emerged were easily identifiable not only by their distinct ethnic, cultural attributes, but how those attributes differed from the mainstream established American culture and identity. Coupled with their historical presence on the English stage for comic relief, and as operators and actors of the vaudeville stage, Irish Americans became interpreters of immigrant cultural images in American popular culture. New arrivals found their ethnic group status defined within the immigrant population and in their new country as a whole by the Irish on stage. Unfortunately, the same interactions between ethnic groups within the close living conditions of cities also created racial tensions which were reflected in vaudeville. Conflict between Irish and African Americans saw the promotion of blackface minstrelsy on the stage, purposefully used to place African Americans beneath the Irish in the racial and social urban hierarchy. Although the Irish had a strong Celtic presence in vaudeville and in the promotion of ethnic stereotypes, the ethnic groups that they were characterizing also utilized the same humor as the Irish donned their ethnic costumes. Groups such as the Chinese, Italians, Germans and Jews utilized ethnic caricatures to understand themselves, as well as the Irish. The urban diversity within the vaudeville stage and audience also reflected their societal status, with the working class constituting two-thirds of the typical vaudeville audience. The ethnic caricatures that now comprised American humor reflected the positive and negative interactions between ethnic groups in America's cities. The caricatures served as a method of understanding different groups and their societal positions within their cities. The use of the greenhorn immigrant for comedic effects showcased how immigrants were viewed as new arrivals, but also what they could aspire to be. In addition to interpreting visual ethnic caricatures, the Irish-American ideal of transitioning from the shanty to the lace curtain became a model of economic upward mobility for immigrant groups. Decline. The continued growth of the lower-priced cinema in the early 1910s dealt the heaviest blow to vaudeville. This was similar to the advent of free broadcast televisions diminishing the cultural and economic strength of the cinema. Cinema was first regularly commercially presented in the U.S. in vaudeville halls. The first public showing of movies projected on a screen took place at Costa and Bial's Music Hall in 1896. Lured by greater salaries and less arduous working conditions, many performers and personalities, such as Al Jolson, W. C. Fields, Mae West, Buster Keaton, the Marx Brothers, Jimmy Durante, Bill Bojangles Robinson, Edgar Bergen, Fanny Brice, Burns and Allen, and Eddie Cantor, used the prominence gained in live variety performance to vault into the new medium of cinema. In doing so, such performers often exhausted in a few moments of screen time the novelty of an act that might have kept them on tour for several years. Other performers who entered in vaudeville's later years, including Jack Benny, Abbott and Costello, Kate Smith, Cary Grant, Bob Hope, Milton Berle, Judy Garland, Rose Marie, Sammy Davis, Jr., Red Skelton, and the Three Stooges, used vaudeville only as a launching pad for later careers. They left live performance before achieving the national celebrity of earlier vaudeville stars, and found fame in new venues. The line between live and filmed performances was blurred by the number of vaudeville entrepreneurs who made more or less successful forays into the movie business. For example, Alexander Pantages quickly realized the importance of motion pictures as a form of entertainment. He incorporated them in his shows as early as 1902. Later, he entered into partnership with the famous Players Lasky, a major Hollywood production company and an affiliate of Paramount Pictures. By the late 1920s, most vaudeville shows included a healthy selection of cinema. Earlier in the century, many vaudevillians, cognizant of the threat represented by cinema, held out hope that the silent nature of the flickering shadow sweethearts would preclude their usurpation of the paramount place in the public's affection. With the introduction of talking pictures in 1926, the burgeoning film studios removed what had remained the chief difference in favor of live, theatrical performance. Spoken dialogue. Historian John Kenrick wrote, "Top vaudeville stars filmed their acts for one-time payoffs, inadvertently helping to speed the death of vaudeville. After all, when small-time theaters could offer big-time performers on screen at a nickel a seat, who could ask audiences to pay higher amounts for less impressive live talent?" The newly formed RKO Studios took over the famed Orpheum vaudeville circuit and swiftly turned it into a chain of full-time movie theaters. The half-century tradition of vaudeville was effectively wiped out within less than 4 years. Inevitably, managers further trimmed costs by eliminating the last of the live performances. Vaudeville also suffered due to the rise of broadcast radio following the greater availability of inexpensive receiver sets later in the decade. Even the hardiest in the vaudeville industry realized the form was in decline. The perceptive understood the condition to be terminal. The standardized film distribution and talking pictures of the 1930s confirmed the end of vaudeville. By 1930, the vast majority of formerly live theaters had been wired for sound, and none of the major studios was producing silent pictures. For a time, the most luxurious theaters continued to offer live entertainment, but most theaters were forced by the Great Depression to economize. Some in the industry blamed cinema's drain of talent from the vaudeville circuits for the medium's demise. Others argued that vaudeville had allowed its performances to become too familiar to its famously loyal, now seemingly fickle audiences. There was no abrupt end to vaudeville, though the form was clearly sagging by the late 1920s. Joseph Kennedy, in a hostile buyout, acquired the Keithel B. Orpheum Theatres Corporation, (COW), which had more than 700 vaudeville theaters across the United States which had begun showing movies. The shift of New York City's Palace Theater, vaudeville's epicenter, to an exclusively cinema presentation on November 16, 1932 is often considered to have been the death knell of vaudeville. No single event is more reflective of its gradual withering, though talk of its resurrection was heard during the 1930s and later. The demise of the supporting apparatus of the circuits and the high cost of live performance made any large-scale renewal of vaudeville unrealistic. Architecture. The most striking examples of Gilded Age theatre architecture were commissioned by the big-time vaudeville magnates and stood as monuments of their wealth and ambition. Examples of such architecture are the theatres built by impresario Alexander Pantages. Pantages often used architect B. Marcus Prittaker, 1881–1971, who in turn regularly worked with muralist Anthony Heinsbergen. Prittaker devised an exotic, neoclassical style that his employer called Pantages Greek. Though classic vaudeville reached a zenith of capitalization and sophistication in urban areas, dominated by national chains and commodious theaters, small-time vaudeville included countless more intimate and locally controlled houses. Small-time houses were often converted saloons, rough-hewn theaters, or multi-purpose halls, together catering to a wide range of clientele. Many small towns had purpose-built theaters. Post-vaudeville, some of the most prominent vaudevillians successfully made the transition to cinema, though others were not as successful. Some performers such as Burt Laugh fashioned careers out of combining live performance with radio and film roles. Many others later appeared in the Catskill resorts that constituted the Borscht Belt. Vaudeville was instrumental in the success of the newer media of film, radio, and television. Comedies of the new era adopted many of the dramatic and musical tropes of classic vaudeville acts. The rich repertoire of the vaudeville tradition was mined for prominent primetime radio variety shows such as The Rudy Vallee Show. The structure of a single host introducing a series of acts became a popular television style and can be seen consistently in the development of television. From The Milton Berle Show in 1948 to Late Night with David Letterman in the 1980s. The multi-act format had renewed success in shows such as Your Show of Shows with Sid Caesar and The Ed Sullivan Show. Today, performers such as Bill Irwin, a MacArthur Fellow and Tony Award-winning actor, are frequently lauded as new vaudevillians. To vaudeville and the use of its distinctive argot continue throughout Western popular culture. Words such as flop and gag were terms created from the vaudeville era and have entered the American idiom, though not credited often. Vaudevillian techniques can commonly be witnessed on television and in movies. Archives. The records of the Tivoli Theatre are housed at the State Library of Victoria, Melbourne, Australia, with additional personal papers of vaudevillian performers from the Tivoli Theatre, including extensive costume and set design holdings, held by the Performing Arts Collection, Arts Centre Melbourne. The American Vaudeville Museum, one of the largest collection of vaudeville memorabilia, is located at the University of Arizona. The Elgin and Winter Garden Theatres in Toronto houses the world's largest collection of vaudeville props and scenery. The Benjamin Franklin Keith and Edward F. Ilby collection housed at the University of Iowa includes a large collection of managers' report books recording and commenting on the lineup and quality of the acts each night. See also vaudeville and variety collections, held in the Performing Arts Collection, Arts Center, Melbourne. Modern-day vaudeville theater in Austin, Texas. Vaudeville ventriloquists. Virtual vaudeville. Glossary of vaudeville slang. University of Washington Libraries Digital Collections, J. Willis Sayer Photographs. University of Washington Libraries Digital Collections, Pryor and Norris Troupe Photographs. University of Washington Libraries Digital Collections 19th Century Actors Photographs. University of Iowa Libraries Special Collections, Keith R. B. Vaudeville Theater Collection. Ruckus. American Entertainments of the Turn of the 20th Century from the collection of the Beinecker Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. Here Gary Stevens on Vaudeville. Eaker 1988. Illinois Digital Newspaper Collections. Vaudeville News. 1920 to 1929.